Let me tell you about a photograph that says more than any official portrait ever could. It's 1953, and inside Westminster Abbey, the most elaborate ceremony in British history is unfolding. A mother is being crowned queen. Her eldest son, barely 5 years old, watches from the royal box in a miniature suit. But her daughter, a 2-year-old girl with bright eyes, isn't there at all. She's at home, watching none of it, considered too young to attend. And right there, in that single detail, you see the story of Princess Anne's entire life taking shape. Close enough to the center of power to feel its gravity, never quite positioned at its core. But here's where it gets fascinating. That little girl, the one left behind on Coronation Day, would grow up to become the person Queen Elizabeth II depended on more than almost anyone. Not the heir, not the spare in any tabloid sense. Something far more interesting than either. She became the Queen's most trusted lieutenant, her steadiest companion, and the woman who would walk beside her mother's coffin on the final journey home. This is the story of a bond built not on grand gestures or public declarations, but on shared temperament, relentless work, and a love of horses, duty, and getting on with it. And I think it might be one of the most underestimated relationships in modern royal history. The daughter who started life as second in line. When Anne was born on August 15, 1950 at Clarence House in London, she was second in line to the throne, right behind her brother Charles. 2 years later, when her mother became queen, that position seemed to carry real weight. But British succession at the time followed male preference primogeniture, and every brother born after her pushed her further down the line. First Andrew in 1960, then Edward in 1964, then their sons and grandsons. Today, she sits 17th. And yet, and this is what I find so compelling, that constitutional sidelining may have been the very thing that freed her. Because Anne was never going to be queen, she was never burdened with the impossible expectations placed on Charles. She didn't need to perform the role of future monarch. Instead, she could simply do the work. And she did. More of it, frankly, than almost anyone else in the family. Biographers have argued that this position gave the mother-daughter relationship a different texture than what existed between the Queen and Charles. There was no rivalry for the throne, no weight of succession hanging between them. What grew instead was something more practical, a professional partnership between two women who both understood that the crown was, above all else, a job. A childhood shaped by duty and defended with fire. Let's talk about the early years because they're important. Anne grew up between Buckingham Palace, Balmoral in Scotland, and Sandringham in Norfolk. Like her brother, she was cared for primarily by nannies and nursery staff, standard for the era and class, but a detail that later critics would seize upon. In 1953, less than 2 years into her reign, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip left on a 6-month Commonwealth tour. 6 months. Charles and Anne, still small children, stayed behind in Britain. By modern standards, that separation seems staggering. But for a young queen rebuilding the Commonwealth after the Second World War, it was considered unavoidable, a duty that could not be delegated. What's remarkable is how Anne responded to this narrative decades later. In a BBC documentary marking the Queen's Golden Jubilee, she pushed back, hard, against the idea that her mother had been emotionally distant. She insisted the Queen was as caring as any other mother and pointed out that her absences were for state duties the children understood were unavoidable. She emphasized that Philip's strong role and the presence of devoted nannies meant they never felt neglected. Not a trace of self-pity, not a shred of resentment. Just a daughter setting the record straight with the same directness her mother was known for. And those private moments did exist. BBC home movies, narrated by the Queen herself, show a very different picture from the stiff public image. A young Anne running around Balmoral, laughing with ponies and dogs, boisterous and confident in a way her shy older brother was not. Palace insiders confirm that while Elizabeth couldn't manage school runs or bedtime stories, she maintained family routines, insisted the children join for meals when possible, and treasured those holidays in Scotland where she could be more relaxed and hands-on. It's worth noting something else about those early years. Charles and Anne, as the two eldest, experienced a different childhood rhythm from Andrew and Edward, who were born after the Queen had been on the throne for nearly a decade and had more control over her schedule. Biographers note that Elizabeth was more available to the younger boys and that family life had settled into a more predictable pattern by the 1960s. But Anne never held this against her mother. She stressed that the Queen's approach was consistent with all four children, and that any difference lay in improving diary management, not changing maternal feelings. One recurring observation from serious biographers stands out to me. Even as a child, Anne was temperamentally her mother's mirror, practical, brisk, unimpressed by fuss. Where Charles, more sensitive and introspective, struggled with the public demands and boarding school regimes, Anne adapted readily. That difference in temperament shaped how each child experienced their mother's busy life, and it may have been the very foundation of everything that followed between Elizabeth and her only daughter. Two women cut from the same cloth, understanding each other without needing to spell it out. From Olympic athlete to the Queen's right hand. Anne didn't ease into public life. She charged into it. By her late teens, she was undertaking solo engagements, and by the early 1970s, she had established herself as a serious working royal. Her involvement with Save the Children beginning in 1970, she would eventually become its president, set a pattern of long-term, unglamorous, deeply committed patronage that echoed the Queen's own approach to charitable work. But it was horses that wove the tightest thread between mother and daughter. Both women shared a deep love of riding, spending time together on horseback at Balmoral and across the royal estates. Anne took that shared passion to an extraordinary level, winning the individual European Eventing Championship in 1971, and then competing for Britain at the 1976 Montreal Olympic Games, the first member of the British royal family to compete in the Olympics. Can you imagine what that meant? Not just to Anne, but to a mother who had spent her life watching horses, breeding them, studying form. The Queen attended events, followed her daughter's progress with intense interest, and the pride between them was unmistakable. This wasn't indulgence, it was hard-won achievement, and the Queen respected it deeply. And as the decades unfolded, Anne's role shifted from athlete and charity patron to something bigger. She became one of the monarch's most relied upon representatives. She undertook foreign tours on the Queen's behalf, particularly across the Commonwealth. Her reputation for thorough preparation, packed itineraries, and zero drama made her invaluable, especially as the Queen aged and needed to delegate more. By the 1990s and 2000s, the numbers told the story plainly. Year after year, Anne ranked near or at the very top for royal engagements completed. While others grabbed headlines, she was out there, day after day, opening facilities, visiting charities, representing the crown in places most people never heard about. Commentators from respected outlets consistently contrasted her workmanlike approach with the more glamorous but less steady contributions of other family members. Robert Hardman put it well when he observed that in the Queen's later decades, when other senior royals were aging or mired in difficulties, Anne's steady presence and punishing schedule were essential to maintaining the monarchy's visibility. The Queen trusted Anne to get on with it more than almost anyone else. And Anne delivered, every single time. The jewels that tell the story. Now, here's where the story becomes beautifully tangible. Because if you want to trace the arc of this mother-daughter relationship, you can do it through jewelry. and every piece tells you something real. For Anne's 18th birthday in 1968, the Queen and Prince Philip gave her a diamond necklace with ribbon and festoon motifs, along with matching diamond earrings. These weren't flashy, attention-seeking pieces. They were classic, enduring, and perfectly suited to a young woman about to step onto the public stage. Anne wore them for decades, at state banquets and formal events, and every appearance was a quiet nod to that original gift from her parents. Then came the wedding pieces. When Anne married Captain Mark Phillips in 1973, the Queen Mother gifted her the Aquamarine Pineflower Tiara. The Queen facilitated Anne's long-term use of the Meander Tiara, originally belonging to Prince Philip's mother, Princess Alice, a piece that symbolized not just family heritage, but the passing of responsibility between generations of royal women. In later life, Anne continued wearing pieces given or passed on by the Queen, including a pearl and sapphire choker originally belonging to Queen Mary, at the most significant state occasions. Each appearance created a visual thread connecting past and present, grandmother to daughter, jewel by jewel, decade by decade. A quiet archive of love expressed not in words, but in what she chose to wear and when. Two women, one temperament, zero fuss. I think what makes this relationship so compelling for anyone who has watched these two women over the years is how alike they were, and how that likeness became the bedrock of their bond. Both shared an aversion to emotional display in public. Both valued punctuality, preparation, and a brisk working style. Those who worked with them often remarked that when on duty, they spoke to each other more as colleagues than as mother and daughter, yet with an underlying ease that revealed deep familiarity and trust. Both weathered relentless public scrutiny without self-pity or emotional outpouring. Consider Anne's response during the 1974 kidnapping attempt when a gunman tried to force her from her car on the Mall. Her reported reply, "Not bloody likely." That unflappable toughness mirrors the Queen's own composure during crises, the Windsor Castle fire in 1992, the national grief after Diana's death. Two women, separated by a generation, responding to chaos with the same steely calm. And during the difficult 1990s, when 3 of the Queen's 4 children saw their marriages dissolve and the monarchy faced its sharpest criticism in decades, Anne maintained a low-drama profile, continuing her charity work and representing the Queen without fuss. Historians interpret that steadiness as a source of quiet reassurance for a monarch under siege. The final journey. And then we arrive at the end, and this, I must say, is where the story becomes almost unbearably moving. On the 8th of September 2022, Queen Elizabeth II died at Balmoral. Anne was there. She later said she had been fortunate to share the last 24 hours of my dearest mother's life. Think about those words. Not tragic, not devastating. Fortunate. That single word tells you everything about how this woman understood both love and duty. What followed was extraordinary. Anne accompanied her mother's coffin on its journey from Balmoral to Edinburgh, then to London, then to Windsor. She was there at every stage, a visible guardian. She took part in the Vigil of the Princes at St. Giles's Cathedral and Westminster Hall, becoming the first daughter of a monarch to join such a vigil. That detail is significant. It wasn't tradition. It wasn't expected. It was earned through decades of service and an unbreakable bond. Her public statement combined personal grief with the language she had spoken her entire life: duty. She thanked the public and called it an honor and a privilege to accompany her mother on her final journey. In a later BBC documentary about King Charles's coronation year, Anne revealed something quietly devastating. She spoke of feeling a sense of relief when the crown was lifted from the Queen's coffin, because it symbolized the transfer of that immense burden to the new monarch. That remark carries a lifetime of understanding. Only someone who had watched up close what the crown cost her mother could speak of relief at its passing. During those final ceremonies, Anne wore pearl earrings believed to have been gifts from her parents. Even in grief, the jewelry told the story. Personal mourning and family continuity, woven together as they had been for 70 years. So here is what I want to leave you with. Princess Anne was never meant to rule. The Constitution made sure of that. But she became something perhaps more remarkable, the person a reigning queen trusted above almost anyone else to carry the weight of the crown's daily work, not through ambition, not through drama, through showing up every single day and getting on with it. She went from the toddler left at home on Coronation Day to the daughter who walked beside her mother's coffin 70 years later, and every step in between was earned. 2 women, 1 temperament, a bond forged in shared duty, a love of horses, and the understanding that some things matter more than being seen. I'd love to know, what moment in their story speaks to you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this kind of story is what you come here for, the real history, the emotional truth behind the pageantry, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss one. Until next time.